Welcome back to VWBPE's afternoon events. It is time now to introduce to you our closing keynote, Dr. Larysa Nadolny. Dr. Larysa Nadolny is a faculty member at Iowa State University. Her extensive experience in developing virtual worlds with the Second Life and OpenSim software enables her to understand the technical and ethical issues involved in using the software and operating in virtual environments. View her presentations, publications, and awards at her website, www.drnadolny.com. Everyone, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our closing keynote, Dr. Larysa Nadolny.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. A little bit of background about myself. I'm currently a faculty member at Iowa State University in the School of Education. I teach instructional technology courses, and my research focuses on immersive technology and teaching and learning. I've been involved in Second Life and then OpenSim since about 2007, and I've seen some amazing changes in the technology and in the community over the years. Today I'm going to share with you a little bit about the SciEthics Interactive Project and the lessons I've learned, particularly from the research perspective. On this slide here, you can see a link to my own website where I have my research and projects and grants that I've been a part of. But in particular for today, this is the most important website here. And that is for SciEthics Interactive. And at this website, you can download the OER files for our 2 islands that I'll talk about in a few minutes, as well as teacher and student handouts. You can also sign up for news updates because we do update our islands every 6 months or so. So this way you'll know when we have a new release. Okay, I want to get to the lessons learned and from this project, and that's the focus of this presentation. But before I do that, I need to give you some background information. First off, the idea for this project, it is what it sounds. It's science and ethics together in a 3D virtual world. When I worked at Westchester University in Pennsylvania, a group of us came together with this great idea. How could we use the power of virtual worlds to have students experience ethical issues in science in the safety of a virtual world? We came together. We ended up getting NSF grant funding from that. From the NSF funding, they were looking at projects that would help stop the flow of ethical misconduct of researchers, which some of you may or may not know is actually increasing over time. And they wanted to fund creative ideas. And of course, this was back in 2008, so it was a great creative idea at the time. I ended up getting also funding from HP, which gave me a huge sense of collaboration from not only people in Pennsylvania, but people from across the United States, in Europe, in England, and also South Africa. What you can see here are the 2 different islands, and they have 2 very different approaches. If you look at the picture on the left, Transgen Island is all about transgenic salmon, which in other words is GMO salmon. We know that's a pretty big topic nowadays. What we decided that on this island, students would have a role. They would enter the island and have to collect data. They'd have to interface with non-playing characters. They'd have to get emails from supervisors. And all along the way, there are situations that they're put into that are, borderline ethical, unethical. Different things where maybe a supervisor is pressuring you to change your data just so slightly. Nothing that's, a clearly right or wrong answer. And at the very end of this experience, which is only a few hours in the virtual world, the student writes a report and makes a decision about this salmon. Should this salmon be used for human consumption or not? On the right side is Rainforest Research Island, which we most recently completed. In this island, you come on only as one role as a scientist who's been hired as a consultant. And now you have conflicting situations. You have your beliefs as a scientist, but you also have people that you're serving as a consultant role. On this island, you have to determine the carbon storage of a tropical rainforest. And that does sound like a mouthful, but for biology students, that's a perfect experience for them and something that they probably would never have had. So on this island, you collect data, you see different situations happening on the island, including indigenous populations, and you get to explore it, again, a few hours of time, and then you have to make a decision for your instructor. So what you may have noticed about these two islands is that they're educational simulations, and they're mainly designed for college-age students. But I've been told that it would be easily applicable to especially advanced high school age students as well. Although this presentation is more about lessons learned than the research, it's kind of an important point. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about the data we collected and some of our findings. We gave surveys to students, quizzes, especially on academic content related to the island. We interviewed faculty, we interviewed students. We gave standardized tests like the DIT, which is for ethical decision making. We were able to access pictures of avatars to see how people changed their avatars that were in the virtual world. And we also had heat maps to know where everyone went on the island using sensors around the island. This example you see here is of the heat maps. So you'll notice that this one is the Transgender Island. Students start at one location and they work counterclockwise around the island. And by doing this, they could have followed a single linear path, partly circular really, or they could have been more exploratory in their movement. Or if you look all the way at the right side of that picture, extremely exploratory in their movement. So what we found is even though overall students reported that they really enjoyed the experience and they said they learned a lot about science and ethics, they really did experience the island very differently depending on who they were and their background. Here's some other data that has not been published yet, but we're working on it. In the top triangle, you see 3 boxes about achievement and perceptions and belief about the experience that the students had, especially the one that says educationally worthwhile. So students who came through this, the majority of them agreed that this experience was educationally worthwhile to them. On the bottom, we have things we measured in the world. For example, them saying how much they related to their avatar, how much time they spent in the virtual world, and how they moved in the virtual world. Remember that picture I showed on the last slide. So using statistical analysis, we found this type of correlation. So students who found it educationally worthwhile also identified more with their avatar. They also spent more time in worlds, and they also tended to move in a more exploratory pattern than a linear pattern. I know that is an extremely brief background of the research, but I'd like to stop here for a minute. Does anyone have any questions on that before I go into the lessons learned and the things that I gleaned from this long project over time? While you all are thinking of a question, I'll post in the chat here a link to one of the articles that was published. And on this article, we discussed the design process, what it took to design this virtual world, each step of the way. And that was published last year in Educational Technology Research and Development. All right, it seems to me like you all are good, which means that I'm being either very clear Or maybe I should do a whole nother presentation on the data sometime. All right, great. Okay, let me move on here. The lessons. Oh, I see one question. Did the behaviors vary between the two sims? They actually did. So the data that you saw there was from Transgen Island because we have that one so much more researched because it's been a few years. And that one, we had a specific pattern for the data that you needed to collect. What we learned from the first one was that a more exploratory pattern was better. So for the second island in Rainforest research, it's not a linear pattern. We're working on the data collection for that, so I can't report on that yet, but I have a feeling that more students will find it more meaningful if they get to randomly explore instead of having to be told what to do. I think it's a better way to be metacognitive about what's going on in the world and what kind of information you need to make a good decision about the island. So you all can access them if you want. That we collected data, especially on the first island, Transgen Islands, and that it did have an impact on learning. But there's always so much more to experience than data. So I'm going to share with you 4 lessons that I've learned in the past 5 years on this project. Okay, the first one here. The chart is difficult to read, but I'll get to that. As I mentioned, this was a truly collaborative project between a variety of faculty. Technology has moved on. So we've had to even go back again as we update technology. We have to make sure that that is functioning properly, and then making sure that the same kind of content is coming out for the students. So on this lesson, under the bottom it says, therefore, lesson 1, it takes a village to raise a virtual world. And it really did for us. Now, one of the negatives here that you can see, because it's not all amazing things that have happened, we had funding. We had funding from NSF and we had some support from HP, and that made it possible. It would have been very difficult for me to get together with other faculty who don't have the time or the energy or the skills to create in a virtual world, to pull together and to make this happen. So that is a challenge for most people that are trying to do something like this. And that's one of the reasons it was so important to us that we share it freely with everyone, because it was our government, it was funding for us to make an open project that could be used in classrooms across the world. Okay, moving on to the next lesson. A good chunk of the time was on the design, more than on that research, which was our ultimate goal for this study. In the design process, I gave the student developers, and I mentioned I had 3 to 4 a year, I gave the student developers the freedom to imagine whatever they wanted, a way to deliver material, a way to interact with objects, a way to have fun with the experience. I didn't want to just tell them as a faculty member what to do. I wanted them to really immerse themselves into the world and have a good time with it. Now that sounds like a great idea, and they made some creative things. For example, one of them made a soccer game that you could actually play, which was kind of neat. Another one made a rocket launcher, which of course is very useful in a virtual world. Not really, but he had a good time with it. They did really creative things. One had it was Halloween time, and they made a fun maze where there were ghosts hidden, and you couldn't even get out of the maze unless you could answer all the questions correctly. But having that kind of openness had its limits as well. And I want to mention 2 things that were issues that came back to bite us a little bit. The first one is we didn't keep an eye on the goal. So for example, in the beginning, we decided that the students would collect their data, but they will also graph it within the virtual world. That sounded like a great idea, everything contained within this one space. They don't have to go out to Excel. They don't have to input their data in that. They can get everything done when they're in the virtual world. Well, that sounds, again, like a good idea, except that we spent so much time trying to work on all of the bugs and the coding to almost simulate an Excel type environment that it was frankly a waste of part of their time when they could have been doing something a little bit more meaningful. So they worked repeatedly for about a year, different students taking on that project and then getting stuck. Another student taking it on and getting stuck. Getting a little bit further, finally we got to a working system. The problem was it was glitchy. So even after all that work and all that time, we ended up saying, you know what, Excel is pretty good at analyzing data and graphing data. Why don't we just have them use Excel? So we ended up dropping that from the simulation. When we look at the learning goals of the simulation, they had nothing to do with graphing the data in the virtual world. They were about learning and the experience, the science, and the ethics. So if we had just focused ourselves back to the goals more frequently, we would have known earlier that we should have let that one go because it wasn't instrumental to what we wanted students to do in the virtual world. The second one that's a good example of that is the picture right here that you see, which is another student project. She was so excited about this. She, at one point you have to go into laboratory setting and you need to weigh the salmon to see their growth over time. And we had these replicas that we made of a laboratory environment that would have this type of salmon. So one of the female computer science students said she wanted the students to be able to fish out the fish and put it on a table and be able to weigh it. Well, she got as far as a net that you could actually pick up, and she had the gesture where you could actually fish in, and then the fish would appear in the net, and then you could take it to the table and it would lay out. We thought this was amazing. We thought that, wow, the students are going to feel like they really are weighing the fish, all the steps. They're taking the fish out, they're placing on the table, and they're weighing it. The problem became when we tested this with students. We found students got stuck here. They didn't know what to do. The reason was this wasn't a part of the process. The fish are actually very small when they're weighed, and they're in beakers, and they're weighed as a mass of fish. So to pull out one individual fish and measure it wasn't meaningful to their data collection. So then they had this piece of data, and they ended up not knowing what to do with it. So they would email their instructor, say, where is this data supposed to go? It's different from the other data. Or really, it was just extra data. So again, it was one of those things where for them to get to their goal, they had to work with these certain fish that were already set up. We didn't need to add an extra simulation with fish that didn't work with their main objective. So on this one, lesson, stay focused on the goal. All right, even though I'm saying that you have to stay focused, that doesn't mean there isn't room for fun. The fun just needs to be better tailored to be integrated into what they're already doing and why it's important. What you can see here is a zip line that we have on the Rainforest Research Island. So remember how I said on this island, you move in a more random pattern. You actually have 3 different plots of trees that you need to collect data on to calculate carbon storage. And these 3 different plots are in random places around the island. If you walk, it could take you a while. So it's fine to move around and explore, but you may never find 1 or 2 of the plots if you just don't run across them. So we made a zip line that goes between 2 of the plots. The problem is you have to find the zip line. So there's the fun in that. It's kind of up a mountain and you climb it. But once you find that zip line, then you're shot right across, and it was a great script. You sit down on the chair and it zips you across the island to the other plot, which is kind of hidden in the corner. So again, it's a fun thing that's connecting them to the process that they have to complete, to their real data that they need to collect. But they also feel rewarded at the same time. Mentioning a little bit about the game-based learning and gamification that the last keynote speaker talked about. We're rewarding them by showing them this great shortcut if they can do the hard work and climb up the mountain. The second one I want to mention is the very first experience they have in Rainforest Research Island, which is they come to a plane, and you'll see that on the next slide. Their first landing is in a plane in the sky, high up in the sky. They stand in this plane and they get information about their mission, and then they have to put on a parachute and jump. And they're literally jumping out of a plane. The parachute is triggered. They see the parachute above them. There's an animation, so they're holding the parachute, and they land in the correct spot on the island. That was important to us because not only did they get the information, but it's a little bit more realistic, although they probably wouldn't be jumping out of a plane, more realistic at this, as this is a remote location with indigenous populations on it. We also wanted to, again, going to that gamification and the engagement and the excitement that comes with immersion. We wanted that feeling of jumping out of the plane to immediately get them into the virtual world. You know, that rush you get when you see the sky whooshing by you and you see the parachute fluttering, that is a great way to start a lesson. So for this lesson, there is fun and serious. All right, my last lesson here. Take a risk and get big rewards. I want to answer one question I see here before I get to this lesson. Someone typed, wouldn't it be misguided to make them believe their parachute drops in the right spot? All kinds of factors can change the landing zone. And that's true. So let me go a little bit on a side note here. When we first designed the parachute, we thought, let it land wherever it lands. But a lot of the time it landed at the bottom of the ocean. So we couldn't have that happen. We couldn't have them be stuck. One thing on the island we turned off was flying because they wanted to take the time, we wanted them to take the time to walk around or run around the island. So we had to have some limits. So at first we thought, well, how about if they land and we turn on some of the features where, you know, it almost kills them and they go back to the airplane and they have to start again. Well, again, we thought that might be too distracting. It's not part of the goal, and it's their first experience. We want it to be a little bit more positive on the island. So then we thought, well, maybe we can just put up some invisible prims that would gently guide them to the right spot. And that ended up being the right solution. The students also tried to think of a script that would randomly place them on the island, but we found that it didn't always work, and sometimes they were stuck in a tree or falling off a cliff, so we had to just gently guide them. So what you'll notice if you do download and use this island, when you jump out of the plane, it's not exactly the same spot, but it's all the same area. So they all land in the same area. But that is an excellent question, thank you. And I see a comment here, lesson 4A, don't drown your students. Yes, I should have put that in there. That would have been a good lesson. Okay, back to this picture here, which, since we were talking about the parachute, that's a picture of someone about to jump. So take a risk and get big rewards. This is more about me personally, what I've learned in the past 5 years. I've learned that by doing a collaborative, immersive experience like this, one where there's a rich community of people who are interested in what's going on, that I've gained colleagues of researchers around the world. And that would have never happened for me if I hadn't jumped in to this kind of project. I've also failed. There are parts that went very poorly, and I had to learn from them quickly and make sure that we kept moving forward. An example of a big failure for us was when we first piloted transgen in a classroom. We had done it with each other and everything worked perfectly. But what the teacher had decided to do was to have her whole class, which was about 30 students, go into a computer lab and use them all at once. So they all signed up for an avatar all at once. They all showed up at the same spot all at once. And of course, what happened? The server crashed all at once. The teacher wasn't very happy. The students were frustrated with the situation. And then, of course, you're thinking, is this the right thing to do? But then once you get over, the disappointment of what happened, we thought about, well, why did this happen? That's when we started researching our other options of server space, about working with grids that are exploring different options of like distributed scene graphics and things of that nature, and also telling the teacher, this is an out-of-class activity. Let them come one at a time, a few at a time on their own. It's not something that you're supposed to step them through together. And that also defeats the purpose of an exploratory space. If the teacher is standing there leading them through it, they're not going to get the same experience out of it. So here are some things that have helped me be a part of the larger community that I wanted to mention. A few of them being the SLED listserv. In the early days, that was my savior. Every time I had a question or a difficulty, I knew I could post it on the SLED listserv and get an answer right away. Another one that I'm working with now, as I said, the Moses grid. It is the military and academic grid that they are exploring a lot of new options like distributed scene graphics and things of that nature to try to bring virtual worlds to the next level. VIBE, which is a collaboration for biology education, which aligns very well to my islands. And then, of course, if any of you are practitioners or researchers in the academic field, organizations like ISTE, they have a group for immersive education, EDUCAUSE does, AERA has groups, all these great resources of people and experience that I love meeting and coming together with. What I was hoping that you all sitting out there could do for me, we're a community right here listening to this. So I was hoping that you all could post in the chat, where are your communities that you go to? What helps you get through your struggles, or where do you find people that have similar interests as you? So I'll mention a few that are in the chat. Scilands, Rockcliffe, ISTE, SIG-VE, VSTE, VWER, Virtual Ability, AECT, Caledon, Oxbridge, the OpenSim listserv. These are excellent. There's also an OpenSim educators list. Good job, everyone. Thank you. This is the type of thing that these pockets are what is making us so successful. But in a minute here, I have a challenge for you for taking this to the next level. So you all are posting and still posting some of the places where you get support, where you have your community. I have a challenge for you that'll help us get to the next level of virtual worlds, not just for our own interests, but to pull together a community, to have a more focused agenda for education and how this fits into education. And as we work together, technology will come along with it. So my challenge to you is, we need to figure out a way to consolidate our community resources and groups. As much as it's nice to have different places to go, and I know that because I like the way different places feel and different groups feel, we need to come together more strongly in larger groups. By doing that, we can leverage our resources better. The second one for researchers, we need more rigorous and larger scale studies beyond just implementation or case studies. Now, I can say that because that's what I did too. You know, my research started there as well. But if we want to make a bigger impact in the research community, we need to stop studying individual instances and look a little bit bigger and broader, and to see if the same effects are happening across experiences or across cultures or across demographics. For practitioners, I'd like to see practitioners work together more often. Instead of duplicating our efforts in all these different virtual spaces, we should be forming groups and using the same space for the same learning goals. Because then as you do that, you're not only building a community between you and the other practitioners, you're now building communities of students. So it won't be a group of students comes and leaves, and then it's not used for a few months until another group of students comes. It's a active living space. And then the last one here, share successful lessons for replication. And that's the hardest bit. There's lots of people that have written about individual instances of in their classroom, they've implemented a virtual world activity or even had their whole course be in a virtual world. And that's fine, but they are so specific, it's very hard to replicate that. So I'm encouraging us all to get together into a space that allows us to share those things and share each other and our resources in a way that elevates us all to the next level. And I see some comments here which are very good and interesting about other things that we should be doing, such as for researching results, make sure you publish them as well. And that's always hard to do. Get things published, that is. Putting things in Creative Commons, helping students form a broader community, get students involved in policy discussions. Those are all good suggestions. And then a comment here, wow, these are all profoundly good, but so difficult on the face of it. And I agree. So let me tell you where I'm going to start. Two things for me. The first one is on the research side, because that is what I do. I'm going to be working on some more advanced data collection techniques, specifically in the Rainforest Research Island, because that one is ready to go now. I want to collect some advanced data, and I want to get lots of students in there doing that activity from a variety of walks of life. So I'm going to be working on pulling in as many people as I can to use it so I can look at the data and make those bigger publications. If any of you are interested in being part of that, you can email me. Let me type my email in here. It's lnadolny@iastate.edu, or you can go to my personal webpage and get in touch with me there too. And as for community building, I do want to mention one thing that I heard recently. I'm part of the AERA Aerial SIG, which is one of the subgroups of AERA. And we had some very rich discussions in the last conference about the same thing, about how do we pull people together instead of being fragmented. And one of the ideas that came up was more of a network that includes groups such as the Aerial SIG and the Immersive Education Initiative group, and pulling people together to have a location that we are all connected to each other. So I would keep an eye and an ear out for some of those things coming down the road, but I want to be involved in that process. You know, this has been an important part of who I am now, is being a researcher in virtual and immersive environments. And I want us all to come together to make it be a really powerful experience for people that aren't part of our community. That way we have a big enough presence that the rest of the world sees that as well. I think that's all I have to say. I'll get off my soapbox. But I'm glad that you all came today. Does anybody have any questions for me? Okay, I have a question here. How active is ISU in Second Life currently? It's a big university, so I can't say that I know everything that's happening, but I would say not at all. Unless someone is doing something specifically with an island. One thing that is big here is we have an HCI program with a virtual reality center, and they do a lot of work, but it's more immersive. Like the C6, every wall is a screen kind of environment. There are a lot of faculty here, so I may not know if there is someone doing something. And for me, it's personally, it's in and out. I try to tend to be more in other people's classrooms than I am in my own for virtual worlds. Do you plan on staying here long term? Here meaning on this island in the auditorium? Probably not in the auditorium, but in virtual worlds? I think so. I think I'm excited to see how we develop over time and how we blend with other technologies and how we become more mobile. I think that is one limiting factor that we have currently is the reliance on a desktop or laptop. You know, I see this movement to more mixed and augmented realities, and I want to see how virtual worlds are going to come into that as well. Let me see here. Lots of good questions. Do you have a scope for academically inclined volunteers? I am definitely interested in always working with other researchers and looking at a research agenda and how we can move forward. So if anything, just collaborating and talking is always a good first step. A question about GMOs. What is this? GMO is genetically modified organism. And that is a very heated word. You'll find it in the news as being very negative, like GMO corn and GMO salmon, and the scaring of the process and what that means. So the reason we call the island transgen is because most researchers don't say GMO, they say transgenic. And that's what we wanted to call that island. So a person here noted that there is a GMO cafeteria, and that is correct. That's one of the data collection areas we wanted to do, and we actually didn't end up collecting data from it. But on that island, if you are working in a laboratory setting, usually in the building somewhere they have a cafeteria. So we have a GMO cafeteria on that island where you can actually choose 2 types of salmon for lunch, GMO salmon or non-GMO salmon. So we put that there because we were interested to see if students walked around the island and then went to that cafeteria at the end, which salmon would they choose? It would have been a great thing to study, but we actually never got to that point on it. But it is sitting there on the island. What further sims would be created for students? As of now, those are the only 2. But I am working with a faculty member in South Africa who is interested in making some more medically focused islands as well. So you might see something like that coming forward. All right, I am going through all these questions. These are excellent. The Second Life researcher group seems to be a little bit less active than they were, and I agree. And that's why I'm trying to bring everyone together, because people are still researching in virtual worlds. One of the turning points that I saw was I'd say, demise of the SLED listserv. That was such an instrumental piece of pulling everyone together. And then once all the different things happened in Second Life with the educational discounts and people dispersed, I think that has reduced our impact that we were having before. A comment here. It's important to remember the rest of the world is very active in virtual worlds too, especially New Zealand and Australia. And that's true. But I find that the research groups I'm part of don't explore all that. There needs to be something that brings us together.
Larysa,
And
you also have a couple of questions from the live stream. Is the rainforest finished yet? And apparently somebody asks if there's any student handouts.
the rainforest research is finished and it is released in its original form. So you can sign on my SciEthics Interactive website. If you go there, you can click and fill out a short form and it'll take you to a Google folder where you can download the files. What I have is the OER file. I have a student handout, which you can download and modify yourself, that has instructions. And then also one sheet giving you general instructions on how to load it on your island. Now, I'd like to say the problem with both of these islands is that there is a lot of scripting going on. So unfortunately, when you take an island from point A and move it to point B, not all of the scripts work correctly. So in that handout that I posted with the island, you'll notice there's some instructions on things that you should look at if you want certain types of functionality. With the Transgen Island, that one is more developed. There are 3 different roles and handouts posted. There's even a faculty handbook on that one. I have been told, though, just recently that the Transgen Island, someone loaded it up to a very updated server and there were some textures missing. So what I plan on doing is updating it to a newer version. And then when I do that, I will post a note to everyone who signed up on the website for news, and you'll get an email saying that it's been updated.
You also have another question from the live stream. How do you see roles of NPCs in these sims?
The first, for Transgen Island, the role of the NPC was very limited. We have actually a non-playing character that back in the day it was, more cutting edge, and I say back in the day like 3 years ago. It was a sculpty person, and it wasn't an actual avatar. And she interfaces with you through the chat. But with the rainforest research, because we've come a long way with NPCs, there are actually 3 NPCs on that island that you have to turn on. The first one is someone that is a researcher, and she's in like the orientation area, and she has lost something, and if you help her find it, she'll give you some extra information. The second NPC is in the lab that's on the island, and if you want all the data that you need to collect, you have to go to him with some of your data, and he'll give you what's missing. And then the third NPC is we call her Wise Woman. She's an elder of the indigenous population that's on the island, and she asks you what you think you're going to do. So you have to talk to her in chat and explain to her what you're thinking. And then as researchers, what we've done is we've had that chat go to a database. So we'll be able to see what students think they might recommend for the island if they're talking to someone who's native to that island. And all these scripts, everything in there is, we made some of them, and we also borrowed from different open source items. So feel free to take it and modify it and do what you want with any of these things. It was a lot of work, but we want to share the work that we did.
Are there any other questions that can be typed in text chat for Larysa? I don't see any others on live stream, so any others can be typed in text chat. I don't see any other questions, Larysa, but this is some tremendous work that you're sharing with us. Thank you so much for being with us today.
No problem, and thank you all for being here. And I love sharing what I do, and I'm so glad to have a community like this to work with. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much. This is a wonderful closing to our conference. Thank you, and thank you all for coming.
And we're off here.
That was wonderful, Larysa. You kept up really well.
It went right